everybody to the afternoon session of our April 7th, 2020 Blaine County Board of Commissioners meeting. We're going to start where we ended in our morning session, which is agenda item 9A, which is County Council announcements. County Council, are there any announcements?
Chair, I don't have any specific announcements, but I do understand that there's going to be a conversation around the non-conforming use issue involving the Oregon Country Fair. And I believe, Andy, are you on?
I am.
Okay, Andy can pick it up from there.
Yeah, I'm happy to answer any questions. We've talked about this a little bit, that is I and Keir Miller over in LMD and a few other folks. So I know a few of the issues. I should acknowledge, though, that these are, I understand the county concern and the commissioner's concern with the economic aspect of the country fair and things like it. I should note, though, that a lot of the issues that come up are really for the fair to deal with, that it's their risks, you know, of losing the non-conforming use status thing, not the county. That's not the county's legal risk, it's theirs. So any information I give you is obviously for your benefit and not as advice, you know, that for them to use. For example, they've got their own attorneys. But I'm happy to answer any questions you've got. I don't know if I don't have anything prepared to give you, but I'm happy to address some of the issues that have come up.
Any questions? Commissioner Rosevich?
Thank you. I guess my question is, and I was going to bring this up under future agenda items, is I know that that there's this issue of the non-conforming uses and not being able to use them for 12 months if they cancel events due to the coronavirus. My understanding is that 12-month timeline is a county set county code thing and is not reflected in state statute. And it's something that we could amend our code to change if we were to initiate that. Is that an accurate statement, or am I misreading the difference between the statute and code?
No, I think that is correct. What the statute says is that essentially you can carry on your non-conforming use as long as it began prior to the zoning regs that now prohibit it. In other words, the grandfathering in concept. What the statute says is if your use is interrupted for some period of time, you could lose that non-conforming use status. The statute doesn't define what it means or a time period for interruptions. And so what most local jurisdictions have done is legislate in that area. And the county has done that, and the period we picked is a year. So whatever use you're engaging in, if you discontinue it for over a year, you will lose your non-conforming use status, and thereafter you'll have to comply with whatever the current zoning regulations are. The wrinkle a little bit in terms of how it works with the county Oregon Country Fair is sort of defining what the use is. For example, if you're running a salvage yard in an area where it's not zoned, you're doing things on a more or less routine daily basis. And if you stop doing stuff for a year, you could lose it. The fair, you kind of have to define what the use is. I think more or less it's engaging in this collective fair for, 3 days or so, 2 or 3 days out of every year. And so I think the risk to the country fair is if they don't hold a fair in the way that they typically do, that is a large gathering over that period of time, for each year, they could lose the ability to carry on that same fair use the following year.
Yeah, and that is my real concern. And I do know that there's enough anti-fair folks out in this area that would try and take advantage of that issue that has the 1 year in our code. And I'm also concerned about other non-conforming uses out in the county, like Camp Lutherwood. I don't know if Camp Harlow is considered a non-conforming use, and whether, if those folks aren't able to have summer activities, whether they start losing some of their non-conforming uses approvals over time. So I don't know if it would, I don't necessarily want to make a permanent change to lane code. And I don't know if there's a way to suspend it because of this national emergency. But I would like to see the rest of the board, maybe if they want, willing to support having staff work on that. Because I do think having 50,000 people come into Lane County for 4 days, by the way, is a big piece of economic development for this county, and is millions of dollars to the Fern Ridge area in general. So I'd like us to continue to take a look at that if I have support of a couple other commissioners.
I think I saw Commissioner Sorensen first, and then, nope. Okay, Commissioner Farr, and then Commissioner Burgundy.
Well, thank you, Chair Buck. I was indicating my support for that, as long as that support allowed them to, weather this blip in time. The country fair used to have traffic issues. They mitigated that. There used to be some trespass issues. They mitigated that. They've been a good neighbor. And as Commissioner Bozovic states, tremendous economic boost to the area. So I'm definitely in favor of making certain they don't lose their status based upon this year's abnormality.
Commissioner Burning.
Yes, I also was attempting to nod my head with my hand, but I would like to, not only do I fully support this on multiple grounds, not just economic. I think there are going to be some other events or activities that fall into this genre, if you would, and I would encourage staff to look at waiving or whatever they have to do to enable responsible citizens who are not congregating because of the COVID-19 virus and the pandemic we are experiencing, not to be penalized for doing what we're asking them to do. And I think this falls into that bailiwick.
Very good. I think we got enough head nods for you. You might want to just, under agenda teams, we'll make sure that we've got that for our administrator later. Is there any other county council announcements?
No, Chair, there is not.
Okay, then we'll move to county administration announcements.
Thank you, Chair. Just a few things I want to touch on. I've provided some updates for the board on workforce changes, and I shared with you this morning over 800 of our employees are now set up to work remotely. We have fewer than 100 that are left to connect, but those are in some ways either duplicate or sort of backup remote connections. So we currently have over half of our workforce that is set up to work remotely. That is, to date, we think it's working pretty well. We're having a call tomorrow with all of our managers and supervisors across the organization, and we continue to track and assess how that is going. And we appreciate that our employees, like many out there who are trying to work in a new way, are also juggling their work as well as their personal responsibilities with a lot of folks who have kids who are no longer in school for the school year, for the indefinite future. So if there are questions, and what I will just say is that we are, as we always do, we're responding to this emergency. We're adjusting to meet the needs of the moment, but we're also thinking about the future and how these forced changes from this crisis could impact and will impact our workforce in the future after the crisis is over. And so we continue to evaluate that and be thoughtful about how we can capture opportunities that have presented themselves through this crisis and continue to evolve our workforce, our culture, and our organization and the way we deliver services to the community. So I just wanted to share that we are, that is a sort of in the vein of continuous improvement and continuous learning. We will continue to assess challenges and opportunities that come from new ways that our workforce is conducting business. Secondly, I wanted to touch on, without giving you a lot of specifics because we don't have them, ongoing conversations we're having as we continue to manage the emergency public health response in the community. And as many of the commissioners noted this morning, it's really been an incredible community effort led by Lane County in our public health emergency response. That will continue over the course of the next several weeks. And as Ms. Gaffney indicated this morning, we're expecting the peak of positive cases in Lane County to hit by the end of April into early May. And as that spike, as we hit the peak and then it begins to dissipate, we want to be prepared. Just as we were prepared, we didn't set up an emergency operations center when we first had a positive case in Lane County. We've had an emergency operations center up and running for nearly 2 months now, long before we ever had any positive cases in Lane County. The same is true with our recovery, that we don't want to wait and think about recovery once the last person tests positive in Lane County. We want to start thinking about recovery now. Obviously, we've done some emergency things with our small business loans that we put out and have made available, but two really significant areas of recovery that we're starting to think about and beginning to reach out. I'm beginning to reach out and have conversations with our partners in the community about what recovery can look like. One certainly is economic recovery, and for businesses and employees of other organizations in the community that have been furloughed or laid off. How do we help support our business community and improve employment in the community? And then the other area is with vulnerable communities, the unhoused, renters at risk of becoming unhoused, people that fall in that asset limited, income constrained, and employed category that are really vulnerable and at risk of falling into a more severe situation. So those are the two areas that we're primarily at the moment being very thoughtful about investing in. And we will be reaching out to the chambers and the various industry sectors, the philanthropic community, the faith-based community, our nonprofit partners, obviously our city government partners in that recovery work. I believe that Lane County will play a critical role in coordinating a lot of those efforts, but we cannot and will not be the sole leader on all of those because we have neither the capacity, the expertise, or the resources to do all of that work. But that will need to be a community-wide effort. And I will say, in addition, the board, I know, is well aware of the significant investments Lane County has made and continues to make. You saw nearly $1 million has been spent just under the authority you gave the county administrator in the last week. We've purchased a property of $1.8 million. We are funding the homeless respite centers at the fairgrounds and in Springfield. And so, significant response and expense continues to be incurred by Lane County. And so we're going to need partners as we move forward and develop that recovery work. The final thing I want to touch on briefly is our budget process. It was brought up last week, financial challenges. Where are we at? What is our budget next year going to look like? We are finalizing, and I've really made final decisions on the county administrator's proposed budget that will come to the budget committee by the end of April, and we'll begin that process in early May. While the process will look similar to what we have here today, we're evaluating tools where we'll be able to have all 10 budget committee members participate via video conference. This is likely the forum in which we'll need to meet. We want the process to look similar, the content of what you receive to look similar to prior years. So we are still planning that you will have presentations from departments. Those presentations will look different now than they would have looked if the world looked the same 2 months ago, a month or two ago. So we are catering those presentations with an eye towards what has changed in the workforce, what has changed. Are there revenue impacts that we're expecting in different areas? What corrective actions are we putting in place? So we are working on all of those things. it certainly is possible that by the time the proposed budget gets to the budget committee and by mid to late May or even into June, when the board is adopting the final budget, there may need to be some adjustments in revenue as better information, more current information becomes available. But we are putting some things in place, and I'll just note, looking at our filling of positions and putting a hiring chill in place. So it's not freezing all hiring, but looking thoughtfully at all the positions that we have open and funded and making sure that they're absolutely critical in the current environment to be filled. And if not, let's hold on it and reduce those expenditures where possible. I also just want to make a note that we have, we've had our bond rating increase twice in the last 2 years. Part of that is because we built up reserves. We've been very intentional about that, having 20% or more reserves in all of our funds. That helps us in these times, and we want to look towards those resources to help us with a bridge to get to the future. So I'll pause there, and we can get into more details if you have questions, certainly, but I just wanted to make a note of those areas. It wasn't my intent that we resolve all of them, but more so that you're aware that those are all things that we're actively working on and monitoring.
Any comments or questions? Okay, I don't see any. With that, we'll move on to item 13. Commissioner's business, and the first item is a work session regarding redistricting. There's no staff here because we haven't assigned any of our redistricting conversations to staff at this point. Since our last conversation, we did get a subsequent letter from the League of Women Voters, which is attached as materials and dated March 10th with some recommendations on next steps regarding our previous conversations on how to have a little bit more guidance and direction in our code or charter regarding redistricting. And so I just wanted to open up this time for us to talk about perhaps some of their recommendations or any other recommendations from fellow commissioners on how to proceed. What they've recommended is and supported, which we've touched on before, is an independent commission and how that would be put together. They've also recommended putting together an outline, because if we were to go that route, we would need to put out something on an upcoming ballot in time to be voted on and implemented prior to the actual redistricting. Right now, it's my understanding that the census has delayed some time to get information back. Not entirely sure if that means that there's going to be any additional time on the back end of counting and releasing information, which is typically provided to the president on December 31st of this year. So there's a little unknown there that that this might get pushed out into 2021. Regardless, though, we should continue the conversation. So why don't I open this up now to anybody if you have comments or questions or concerns. Commissioner Sorensen.
Well, one of my questions is who would appoint the redistricting group? Who would do that?
Well, that's a good question. At this point, I feel like if we're going to move forward, we would need to actively as a group approve engaging staff on providing some of that research and guidelines.
Does the league have a suggestion? I know that they talked about having judges be the people, retired judges, I believe, be the people that actually do this.
They
Is
have
that-
stated that in their letter, retired judges, auditors, or other impartial actors specifically was what they stated.
Are there any counties that are doing this?
Multnomah County, I believe, has some of these they mentioned. But this is something, again, that if we want to get into more specifics on this and how we want to move forward, we need to be able to give direction to staff on this.
I would like to suggest that we do move ahead with this and that we try to get some more information about how this works in Multnomah County, how it works in other places where the decision to redistrict the board comes from someplace other than the board, and how it works. I'd be interested in that.
Commissioner Farr.
Thank you, Chair Buck. I've personally been involved in redistricting twice with the City of Eugene for City Council wards. One time a massive redistricting was needed with some major adjustments because it did, the wards didn't make any sense based on geographic boundaries, based on all kinds of different conditions. So after that redistricting, it became quite stable. And when we redistricted again in 2010, there's very little adjustment needed to be done, other than simply for the changes in population growth. You know, my ward, Ward 6, physically got much smaller each time it was redistricted, because this is where the growth is in Eugene, is in the Northwest Eugene area, in Bethel, or a lot of the growth. So that was a relatively smooth process. One of the signers of the recommendation from the League of Women Voters is Kelly Osborne, who was deeply involved in those redistricting efforts by the city. I view her as a true expert on it. Personally, for myself, I always talk about what does the University of Oregon and SHED have in common? A state representative. You know, it's that's a redistricting nightmare, where you have a district in the state that wraps around Springfield, grabs Mackenzie Bridge all the way around through Sweet Home and into Shed. So to get from one of that district to the other, you'd have to drive through 2 other state representative districts. So, you know, we don't want anything like that happening. So I am in favor of a neutral board, considering the different ways that a neutral board could look at redistricting. The less the elected officials, whether it be us, future elected officials, whoever it may be, are involved, the less opportunity there is for people to think that some, people throw out the word gerrymandering. That's not a term I like, but malfeasance is a term I like better. If the malfeasance in redistricting, and you look at SHED and the University of Oregon having the same state rep, there's an issue there. So I think a neutral board. I don't know that retired judges are any better equipped than a retired matrix of people, including business people, educators, whomever it may be, people who are involved in the community. But excuse me, Chair Buck, I like what you're suggesting is that we have staff take a look at it and make some recommendations as to how we could move forward. And if we do read the League of Women Voters recommendation that is included in the board packet, it does give some good concepts for moving forward.
Any other comments? Commissioner Bozovich.
Thank you. Yeah, I think it's not so much to have retired judges do the redistricting, Commissioner Farr. I think the idea is that retired judges would appoint the citizens panel that would do the redistricting. And at least in one of the proposals I've seen, that citizen panel will be made up of a certain number of this party affiliation and a certain number of that party affiliation and a certain number of non-affiliated people chosen from a group of applicants that applies to the retired judges to determine that body. But it gets to be a balanced committee and chosen from willing applicants. So it could have a wide range of input of local citizens. The state of California has moved ahead with this sort of idea way ahead of us. So I would recommend maybe looking at some of the things. I know that I believe it's Sacramento County has gone to this sort of method of having a panel of retired folks that no longer have a dog in the race, so to speak, make the selection from a group of citizens, and they're appointed to fill various slots according to party or non-party, and then it moves on from there, and is adopted basically in an up-down vote of the board later. I think I strongly support this after going through the last redistricting and doing our best to try and set lines in accordance with every guideline from the Secretary of State and the federal government, and still being accused of having self-interest in doing so. It's just because it looks like elected officials picking their own voters. So I support the idea of moving ahead. And what I really would support is looking at some of those California counties and California systems. Of course, we're a little bit different. We don't have auditors necessarily to be the ones picking the redistricting committee members. It might have to be a different process, like retired judges or retired countywide elected officials. That's kind of detail, but I think we should be directing staff to look at this with the idea that ultimately we're preparing a ballot measure that the county would place on the ballot for November to change our charter, because this is our current systems in our charter. It's going to require a charter amendment to change from that system. We can't move away from the commissioners doing the redistricting ultimately unless we change our charter. So I think we need to make any direction we have to staff to be towards a charter amendment that would have to be placed on the ballot by the commissioners. And I think there's been some good work done in the community that we can pick up on.
Commissioner Burney.
I concur with everyone. So I would like to say a few things, but don't need to. You've got the head nods to move forward. Excuse me. I think, like it or not, there are too many parts of the United States where malfeasance or gerrymandering has in fact occurred. And I think the optics, therefore, for any community become suspect. And I think that the last thing that any unit of local government needs is to have the people it is, with all of its heart and with all of its soul, attempting to represent and whose needs we're attempting to service, be seen, or have the opportunity to be seen as having any self-interest in the type of people that voters elect. So I support this. I would hope we would have some sort of presentation that can share with us sort of maybe a few decades worth of how the map has changed in Lane County, what drove those changes. I know way more people than I want to in Sacramento County, so I could connect staff up if they want in that regard, or at least assist, not that they need it. And I would also suggest that we get that in time for staff also to identify for us any actions we need to take, such as the one that Commissioner Bozovich just mentioned, and when we need to take them to, in fact, facilitate a thorough and thoughtful reflection so that we have a different process. I personally like a lot of the recommendations from the League of Women Voters. I would like to see others provide input, and I would like to see this Board of Commissioners being a board that has no self-interest other than representative government in whatever process that we adhere to.
Thank you. And I should probably say that I am a league member, but I was not part of this letter or the formation of their contact in their letters to us. So I want to make sure I put that out. Mr. Mokrzewski.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to share so that the board is aware of this as you're having this discussion. And obviously there would need to be some staff involvement. I just want to make you aware that right now we have the staff that would otherwise, we had Jeff Kincaid who was working on this, the other staff, and I'm currently inquiring with County Council on who we could potentially use for this, because literally everyone that we would otherwise assign this to is working full-time in the Emergency Operations Center. And so I know this is a critical issue that the board wants to move forward with, but I just want you to understand the limited staff resources we have available right now, because particularly for this type of work that would be managed out of county administration, we've sent all those people over to the Emergency Operations Center for our immediate emergency response, which will likely continue in the recovery efforts. So I don't want to be the bearer of bad news, and I don't want to say, no, we can't do it, because we don't have anyone to do it, but I just want you to be mindful of the resource constraints, the staff resource constraints we have at the moment.
Yeah, this is Steve Dingle. I mean, I could probably get some clerks to do this. The lawyer time is extremely limited.
Commissioner Sorensen.
I just wanted to acknowledge that we might have to ask people outside of the county to provide us with additional information. And in particular, I'd like to invite the League of Women Voters to provide that to us. The other thing I wanted to mention is two more things. One is that the current districts, the current 5 districts, have Churchill High School in Southwest Eugene as being not in South Eugene. I personally live in the Churchill High School catchment area of South Eugene, so it's fairly odd for me as a commissioner for South Eugene to have a large number of my constituents' children attending schools in the Churchill catchment area, yet Churchill High School itself is districted into the East Lane district along with communities in the McKenzie Valley, and that action of the Board of Commissioners, which was adopted by a 3-2 vote, was highly, in my view, highly controversial, because it resulted in the type of allegations of gerrymandering that people find so disappointing. And so I'm in favor of looking at alternatives that would make that kind of decision that the board made after the 2010 census a little less likely to occur in the future. I know Commissioner Farr's mentioned several times how Shedd and the University of Oregon are in the same legislative district, but I would just like to remind everybody that you know, the urbanized part of Southwest Eugene is in the largest and most rural of the 5 districts, and that a lot of people over there still think that I'm their commissioner because they think they live in, quote, South Eugene. And so I just think we can't just be pointing at others to show past errors, and we need to be looking ourselves firmly in the mirror as to what this process has resulted in the past. And finally, I'll say that the Board of Commissioners several years ago appointed a group of people to look into charter changes. And the board put on the ballot and the voters approved a charter amendment. And that not all the commissioners may know this, but there is a process by which the Board of Commissioners appoints a citizen group after a census. So within the next year, the board will be required under the charter to appoint a group of people to recommend charter changes. And thus far, charter changes have not been recommended on this topic. That's not to say that they shouldn't, and they might well do that in the future. But in the times that we've done the charter advisory group, they have not recommended this change. And I'll just say that I'm looking forward, both as a commissioner and then as a taxpayer and voter without being an elected official, I'm looking forward to the board appointing this group of people, making sure that they look thoroughly at the charter and any changes that they think should be made, and that we think about implementing those charter changes. And they're still out there. Not all of them have been implemented from the last time. So keep that in mind too. Thank you.
Commissioner Bozievich.
Thank you. I just want to point out to Commissioner Sorensen that Churchill High School prior to the last redistricting was represented by West Lane County, not East Lane, and it was changed from one to the other, and it had never been in South Eugene prior to the redistricting. There were things like City of Eugene wards that were being represented by the City of Springfield commissioner. We could argue about what changed and what you agreed to and not agreed to on the last one. Both of those redistrictings, the 2001 and the 2011, were passed by 3-2 votes. So, let's not go back and try and argue what happened as much as we need to look at what's the best way to move forward in a manner that will gain trust with the voters. And I do believe that we can take some of what's been proposed by the State League of Women Voters for the entire state and rework that to be a county level measure. They're actually proposing a ballot measure at the state level to put redistricting into a separated committee. The differences are there, though. They're doing things like having the Supreme Court of the state make decisions, et cetera. We can't force the Supreme Court of the state to do things because we're a county. So it has to be rewritten at a county level and to apply to what we have authority over. But I do think there's a strong guide already out there, and it just has to be localized and should not involve a lot of staff work to do some of that. In fact, I think some of it's been done by some outside community members already. In addition, we've got until August to get this done as far as a deadline. So I'm hoping that maybe by June, some of our staff is starting to get freed up out of the EOC, and we're not quite where we are right now. And we'll have most of the month of July to put this together. And then the final vote to place on the ballot has to happen in August.
Commissioner Burney.
I just want to state that I'm probably guilty of this. I don't mean to identify how to do something. I think it's really clear, Steve, County Executive, that we agree with your priorities. Our priorities are shared. This is something that is clearly important, and however it occurs in whatever the time frame, it has to operate within the context that it is. So I heard what Commissioner Sorensen said, what other commissioners have said, and my feeling is that we can achieve the results of having a process that creates some good redistricting and takes the optics of self-interest out. And beyond that, I rely on you and your staff to determine how and when to provide us the information to do that. Thank you.
Commissioner Farr.
Thank you, Chair Buck, and thank you, Commissioner Burney, for that perspective. What you said earlier, Joe, regarding getting a historical context of how the redistricting has happened, that'd be very interesting to see, because something that Commissioner Bozievich just noted, that Churchill High School was never in the South Eugene district. I didn't know that. What I do know is I'm looking out of my window right now and I'm looking into Jay's district. Those houses right there are in Jay's district. And they used to be in my city council ward. When the redistricting was made, it was what it was my city council ward was split into two. That has to happen because more people live inside the urban growth boundary inside the city limits than live outside of it. So having a neutral body doing the work on it, taking, for me personally, getting it out of my hands and out of my hair, so that the decisions that are made are, if there are problems that people have, they're not pointing it at the elected officials. They're pointing it at a neutral body that was assigned because of its neutrality. So I think, Mr. Mokrzycki and Chair Buck, you're hearing kind of a consolidated response from the board that we want to see this move forward. And Mr. Mokrzycki, on the time frame that keeps the county safe during this pandemic.
Any other comments or questions?
Chair Buck, this is Steve Dingle. I think we could, if I could get the board to be a little more specific about the kinds of information they want, I think I could work with Mr. Mokrzycki. I think that if you could be specific about the kind of information you want gathered, I'm confident I can get my clerks to at least do that part of it, which is simply going out and gathering a lot of information. And then use it, hopefully once we do that, and as it was just stated, maybe things will settle down in June and we can do a better, we can talk about maybe when the EOC starts winding down, getting some different kinds of staff to do the actual analysis. I'm just throwing that out there.
Understood. Any other comments or questions? I don't see any. I'll just state that the census only comes around once every 10 years, so we don't really have this kind of opportunity for the next census, and time seems to always get away from us, so it's good to have these conversations well in advance. So what I'm hearing from everybody is that we would like to move forward with guidance, sounds like from County Council's office, on a potential ballot measure for November regarding an independent commission for redistricting, what that would look like, what are the best practices for that, and what the timeline specifically would be in order to proceed with it being placed on the November ballot. Did I get that right, everybody? Okay. Okay. Is that enough direction for you, Mr. Dingle?
I think we can watch the video and make it work. And what
Okay.
I'll try and do is summarize and bring back my understanding of what the board is asking for the April 21st meeting.
Very good. All right. With that, we'll move on to item B, commissioners' announcements. Any announcements? Commissioner Farr.
I haven't seen my grandbabies who live about a block away from me in about 4 weeks, and I'm longing to see them, other than video.
I imagine there's a lot of people like that.
That's why I
Any-
said it. I'm virtually everybody's in the same boat I'm in.
Any other announcements? Commissioner Berney.
I should have earlier, but I wanted to thank this board for unanimously approving the consent calendar, which had on it a request from the Lane Workforce Partnership, CEO Christina Payne. She's been working pretty diligently with Austin Ramirez and was really appreciative that we allowed her to repurpose some of her federal funds. I serve on the executive committee of that board. That's why I'm saying that. I also serve at your behest on the El Rapa board, as Commissioner Bozovich did before me. And El Rapa issued a burning ban notice at the request of several state agencies as it relates to respiratory illness. The board was not a part of that, but we're having a meeting on Thursday. And interestingly, that's been a very heated decision. There's been a lot of input on both sides of that, and we're going to have an opportunity to hear that on Thursday. But I did want to just share with the board that at this point in time, that does exist.
Any other announcements? Okay, not seeing any. We'll move on to future board assignment requests. I know that Commissioner Bozevich had one that we all prepared some head nods for. I just want to be able to say that one more time so Ms. Jones can catch it on our minutes.
Sure. I'd like to have LMD staff and county council look into preparing a either temporary or somehow or other permanent ordinance that allows the county to declare an emergency and extend the time limit on non-conforming uses beyond the 12 months that's currently in code.
And none for me. 3, 4, okay, 5. All right, very good. Any other future board assignment requests? Since we're with Commissioner Bozevich, I'll let him do that, and then we'll move on to you, Commissioner Sorensen.
Yeah, I just want to real quickly, it's not so much a request, but Commissioner Burney, and while we're all here in a public meeting, so this won't be a serial communication, I would encourage the LRAPA board to seriously look at limiting the burn ban and providing some ability for folks. I saw a letter come in from a resident way out in Walterville that had prepared a lot of debris piles from last winter's snowstorm that was had us buried about this time, and now can't burn them. And then they become a hazard to his property over the fire season. And this is a very narrow window where people can safely get rid of debris. You know, I understand the idea behind why they went to the burn ban, but I think there needs to be some flexibility in it and some thought put into it. A complete burn ban will actually raise the fire hazards this summer, in a summer where we may not be a great idea for us to be out fighting wildfire.
Commissioner Sorensen.
Am I unmuted now? I think so. I just wanted to say regarding the land use matter that was discussed a few minutes ago, that I thought that this was tied to the events that were canceled because of COVID-19. And the way it was explained, there wasn't any mention of COVID-19. So I just wanted to get my views on record. That in my view, it should only be tied to events that were canceled because of COVID-19.
Any other comments for future board assignment requests?
I'll just, Commissioner Chair, I just will say that I'm okay with that ordinance being tied to the current state of emergency.
Anything else? Commissioner Burney.
Chair Buck, this is Keir Miller with Land Management. Sorry, could I ask one clarifying question of Commissioner Bozevich since he made the request?
Sure.
I'd just like to clarify the timelines on the request. Right now, as you can imagine, staff are pulled in a number of different directions and are telecommuting and have you heard of a couple projects this morning dealing with other hazards and issues, flood and fire projects. In talking with County Council, our understanding is that the board could adopt a change in code to specifically extend the non-conforming use criteria retroactively. And I just want to make it clear that we will take this direction and move forward and do that. It won't happen, obviously, before the fair is scheduled to be held, which is now being canceled, I understand. It will likely come later in the summer, but my understanding working with County Council is that that's fine. The order can be written in a way that's retroactive that would still preserve the non-conforming use status.
Yeah, I'm okay with that, provided they're pretty sure that that retroactivity is defensible. Because I'm just really concerned that there are some people that just flat out don't like the country fair and will try and take advantage of this. And if we open ourselves up to legal challenge, there will be people that jump in. So I'm hoping we can make it as ironclad as possible. It seems like it would be a fairly surgical change to our code, and something that's legislative, not judicial. So it's not something that has to go through planning commission process ahead of that. Was hoping it could be done faster rather than later, but I do understand how staff is being pulled in many directions.
Thanks, and we'll certainly try to get it done as soon as possible. I just wanted the board to be aware that there are those constraints, and we're actually, right now, I'm having staff look into the process and timelines to figure out how soon we could get it into the calendar or on the board's agenda. There are other noticing requirements and other timeline things that are built in, so it's going to be somewhat tight, but we'll move as fast as we can.
Commissioner Berney.
I just want to echo support that it be attached to COVID-19, as Commissioner Sorensen said and Commissioner Bozovich agreed. Honestly, every minute we spend in these board meetings and require staff time is taking staff away from so much work in the field. I sometimes wonder how the White House has daily 1 or 2 hour briefings, because there's so much work that needs to be done. That's just an aside. I did want to say that in the same way that Commissioner Bozovich can't speak for the board, but wanted to provide input for the LRAPA decision, I can't speak for the LRAPA board, but I can say that this was seen as an emergency declaration by the executive director. The board meeting will occur in 2 days. And I assure everyone that we have received so much input, pro and con, without having been part of the decision. So this will be under a microscope Thursday afternoon.
Any other future assignment requests? Seeing none, we'll move on to review of assignments. Mr. Mokryski.
So I have the redistricting item, which was, let me see if I can get this. Direct County Council staff to look into appointing an independent commission on redistricting, looking into best practices and establishing a ballot timeline. I also have the Oregon Country Fair having land management and county council prepare an ordinance or some action allowing for the extension of the non-conforming use. And then of course we have the ordinance on the emergency item from earlier in the day regarding use of lodging facilities for COVID response. So those were the 3. Did I miss anything?
I think that is everything. Okay. Well, I don't see anything else prior to our executive.
Okay.
Oh, I got some hands up. So Commissioner
Yeah.
Bozovich.
Just on assignments, I guess there was one that came out of Public Works on local access roads and developing the code amendment around maintenance agreements and also the recordation of requirement to maintain them in land records. The 2 recommendations that came out of that. And then I don't think there was anything else that came out of the second part of the LARs, but that one LAR discussion had future actions.
That's true. Commissioner Sorensen.
I just had a question at this point in the agenda, assuming we finish the review of assignments and go on to the executive session. Will we be reconvening, and if so, do we come back on to this video platform after the executive session, And if so, is the public going to be allowed to listen in if we do come back into open session?
At this point, for the items that we have for executive session, I'm not necessarily seeing a reason to come back out, although we always reserve the right to do so. But at this point, we most likely won't. If we do, we will need to have our moderator provide us with a new link.
Okay,
Sure,
so
Bob.
at the end of our executive session, then if we do come back into regular session, then we'll be provided with a new link to come on for the public part of the remainder of the meeting.
That would be what I think are the next steps.
Yeah, thank you.
Chair Buck, this is Steve Dingle. I do think it's highly unlikely that you'll need to come back into public session today.
Very good. All right. I will then read us into executive session. And just a reminder that that is not part of this webinar or this webcast. So you will need to exit this and call in to the executive session meeting. So with that, I will read us into executive session. The Board of County Commissioners will meet in executive session to conduct deliberations with persons designated by the governing body to carry out labor negotiations and to consult with counsel regarding the rights and duties of a public body with regard to current litigation or litigation likely to be filed. The executive session is held pursuant to ORS 192.660, subsection 2, subsection D and H, which allows the Board of Commissioners to meet in executive sessions for purposes listed. Representatives of the news media and designated staff shall be allowed to attend the executive session. All other members of the audience are asked to leave the room or the virtual meeting. Representatives of the news media are specifically directed not to report on any of the deliberations during the executive session, except to state the general subject of the session as previously announced. No decision may be made in executive session. We reserve the right to come back out into public session should the need arise. So at this point,
Chair Buck, excuse me, Chair Buck,
yes.
I just want to make one clarification. And I think you said it in your, when you read the formal notice, the only people who would be allowed to participate in the executive session are just like if it were an actual one, which is necessary staff and the media, not the general public.
Very good. With that, we will recess until our executive session at 3 o'clock.